Don't know much about cloud networking? Well, stay tuned for this upcoming episode where we learn the basics.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode here at IT Pro TV. This is your Cisco CCNA show, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at networking architecture or topology architecture, and we're going to be taking a look at the cloud. And joining us as usual is Ronnie Wong to guide us along. How's it going, Ronnie?
It's going well, Aubrey. Thank you again for also joining us as we continue to take a look at some of the different aspects of networking that we have to understand in terms of the fundamentals of networking. And we're up to the idea of the cloud. Now, the cloud for us is probably something a little bit more unusual, since most of us probably got into the realm of actually trying to say, hey, I want CCNA because I want to be able to understand the networking concepts as well as work with routers and switches. And now when you start hearing that term cloud, it's further removed. The very fact is you're no longer putting your hands or even your conceptual knowledge a lot of times directly into configuring routers and switches anymore. Now you actually hear that term everywhere in terms of networking. Everything's being moved to the cloud. So of course that means you as a networking professional should have a conceptual understanding of the terminology that's used, as well as the basics of the architecture, which we're going to dive into in this episode. So hopefully we actually have at least a conversational understanding of what will be happening as you actually move into the workforce. For those of you that are actually moving into the workforce, or if you are like me, an old dog, and I didn't really get into the cloud, I'm still managing my stuff, but you realize that this is the future. So that's where we're going to begin. All right, so Aubrey, here's what we're going to do, okay? So in the basic understanding that we already have, we've talked about the idea of physical networking topologies that are out there. But as we move into the cloud, it really does sound ethereal. Are we no longer actually doing anything with it? What's happening? Is there a physical infrastructure that's there? Yes, okay? So how is it really different than what we have? So when it comes down to it, let's take a look at my screen, and I know that this is kind of not the best visual representation, but Aubrey, as we start to take a look at the idea here, okay, our infrastructure is no longer going to be something that we put our hands on. That's what my grid kind of represents here, is that it's actually in between us. And we don't really get to put our hands on it anymore. The only thing we get to do is actually kind of talk about it and do everything. But there's also a benefit behind this too, Aubrey, which is the very fact is everything in theory should be configured 100% totally working, okay? So that means we don't have to worry about, did I actually connect that right? Did I actually configure those things to actually work together? In the background, the entire infrastructure of everything that we work with in terms of networking in the cloud, they've already got the underlying infrastructure set up for us so that we're no longer really having to deal with it per se in that individual basis where we might be configuring the virtualization itself, whether it's a server, is it storage, is it some type of networking here? All that stuff is now hands off. They're just saying, all you have to do is configure this part and the networking will work. If you need storage, you just have to tell us how much storage you need and it works. You need a server to be able to run DNS or whatever it might be. We can actually turn it on and make it work for you. And all that's virtualized, but underneath all that, of course, are, data centers, right? Servers, rows and rows, okay? Big, gigantic warehouses full of different servers that have, of course, the underlying infrastructure that's there, the applications that are running to make all this work, the operating systems and the hardware, all that's actually right there. So what does that leave you and me with when it comes down to the idea and the concept of the cloud? Well, what we are actually left with a lot of times is the very fact is we no longer touch that. That now becomes what we call the term our cloud resources, okay? So when we're working with some type of cloud environment that's already set up for us, we're really just connecting to resources. A lot of that has to do with the way that we manage it, and that will be through some type of front end. Now, when we talk about front end, Aubrey, normally what this means is that we're actually going to a website that we log into, and then it gives us all the things that we can configure.
Okay.
So for example, something like Office or Office 365 is a perfect example of that. If I'm the administrator of an Office 365 account, I don't go in and go, all right, here's all the copies of the software that I'm going to have to let Aubrey deploy. So I need to make sure that she brings in her stuff and that we have everything done there. Everything's going to be managed through a web portal. Okay, that's kind of the idea of the front end when we start talking about that too. So web interfaces are important as well. The other thing is we can also manage even devices in that front end if we choose to by using something called an MDM, a mobile device management type of platform. So Aubrey, even if you actually bring your own laptop into the actual realm of my Office 365 network, I can control some of it, okay, by actually saying, hey, here's a device that's now registered, and I can go in and deregister that so that Aubrey no longer has access to that Office 365 if I don't want her to have access to it. So sorry, Aubrey.
That's
so
okay.
stuff like that can happen, okay? So you get the idea that there's a front end to this thing that we have that you and I interact with, but we no longer touch, again, anything that we see behind my screen. Now, in the background of that, all of my data is actually no longer stored on individual devices. And well, I say that to a point, they're no longer really primarily stored on the individual devices. But if we connect into some type of web service that's out there or some type of cloud resource, a lot of that's actually going to be synchronized. So I go ahead and I might have a folder on my particular machine. But if I have that, then I say, hey, that's going to be linked up to some type of cloud storage. And that means there's a copy of it up there. So now, even if my laptop completely flames up, and goes into a burning mess that's there, I should still have access to the data as well. So there's back-end servers that are there. And that actually, of course, includes the idea of storage, includes the networking abstraction layers that are there, servers that might actually be there. All that's actually back-end stuff. For the majority of the time, right, we have access to applications like databases and as well. All that comes into play. So, but at the same time, when we talk about all that stuff, especially in the realm of the cloud, we're not really messing with any of this that goes on, okay? So we can actually get a fully managed service in that particular way and manner if we choose to. Now, how in the world are cloud resources are defined or cloud networking defined? There's a particular document that's been out there from NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, from the U.S. government. It's actually SP 145. That's the document that essentially defines what cloud technology is all about. So there's 5 characteristics. There's 4 particular service models. Let me make sure I'm telling you right. Deployment models, Deployment models, and then 3 service models. And we want to make sure that we understand what these are about as we go on through. But if you have this conceptual understanding in mind, you understand that we're not really dealing with the actual architecture in this way. We're going to deal with it in several other ways instead. So let's start off by talking about the idea of a service model as well, okay? So when we move into the realm of a service model, we have to actually kind of realize that this is helping us to answer a fundamental question, okay? What is it that the customer needs to accomplish, okay? So in that way, there's really kind of 3 basic service models that we can talk about. So let me show you how this divides up. So using that same model that you're seeing right here, here's essentially how that service model divides up here, okay? So the key service then that my customer may need to do is say, look, I want to really run my entire network, but I don't really need a lot of my infrastructure on site. I'd rather have it hosted somewhere else which has all the provisions that I need to. Now this one, as you take a look at how everything divided up in terms of the architecture, right? You actually see where it divides up into responsibilities here, okay? The cloud itself may provide you the physical infrastructure and even the virtualization of the technology that you need, but you are the one that's responsible for managing the operating system that's on there. You're the one that's responsible for any type of infrastructure that you're building in terms of networking and applications too. You're the one that's actually responsible for all of this stuff as well. So in other words, you have much more control when you actually choose something like what we call infrastructure as a service, sometimes also written as IaaS. And I should actually put that up here too. Let me lowercase a, and then s here. Okay. So that is another terminology that you hear. Okay. Now, when you start saying that, right, this gives you the control. So it actually mirrors as close as we can to the on-premises environment to do that. But what we do is we say, oh, we need a server in the cloud. Well, we just go ahead and we spin up one and it actually knows how to do that. We need more storage. We can also, of course, go ahead and tell it we need more storage. We're not having to actually configure it or do anything. We're just saying, here's what we need, and it builds it for us. Same thing in terms of networking. We need to connect these things together. It knows how to actually do all that for us. Now, when we're working with technology like this, there's actually several ways we can do it. So some examples here are infrastructure providers such as Microsoft Azure. They can actually give you that particular platform where you can build all the services that you want on your own. Same thing with Google Cloud Platform as well, and even Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS. All those are actually providers where you go, hey, I want to manage pretty much the whole thing. I really just need you to provide just kind of the basic infrastructure and let me build what I want to. And then on top of that, I'll actually add the services that I need, add the applications that I need, everything else that I need as well. Okay. So Aubrey, this is the one that gives us the most control, okay, is what we see.
Yeah.
Now, in that, there has to be other ones. So I just talked about one.
Yeah, you
so Aubrey, can you possibly name maybe another one that you might think of?
I could look at your notes.
Okay.
And give you one.
Sure, that'll work.
PaaS, which
Yep.
stands for Platform as a Service.
That's right. Okay. So that is another one that we have right here. So let's talk about this idea. And you did actually say PaaS.
I did.
So there it is, Platform as a Service. Now, Aubrey, can you see the difference here in terms of the responsibilities when we start to talk about this one instead? Okay.
More cloud provider responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that means less responsibility on me. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay. Where we tend to see this more often, right, is in the development environment. In other words, people that are building applications, web services, stuff like that, they don't really want to actually go, I want to build up an entire server farm. I want to have all this stuff done. They essentially said, here's what I need. I need for those applications that we need to actually be able to run perfectly, to actually have everything set up for us. I just need it to actually work here, okay? And I want it to actually be in the cloud because that way I'm not tied to one particular location anymore. I can go anywhere and work with this entire platform itself. So in that instance then, your developers, or at least here at IT Pro TV, we call them engineers, they essentially hook in and they actually work based off of their platform as a service instead. So the key aspect and what the customer needs to accomplish here is that they're building things like web applications that are out there. So they do that. Then I don't have to worry about, did I set up the infrastructure correctly? Did Aubrey actually need this or versus that? Well, what we can do is say, hey, here's the actual infrastructure and here's some of the things that are actually out there. Well, this is what can happen. So examples of that is if you hear about the idea of Heroku, okay? That's a very popular thing that's also built off of as well. Elastic Beanstalk, and then even the Google App Engine. Those are examples as well of some of the different ways that you might hear about the idea of platform as a service. So Aubrey, we now have infrastructure as a service, we have platform as a service, and I have one more that I need to deal with. And do you know what that one's called?
SaaS.
SaaS.
It's sassy. No.
It is sassy. That's right.
Software as a service.
Yeah. SaaS is sassy. That's right. That is a great way to think about it. Okay. So SaaS is software as a service. And with software as a service, Aubrey, notice the responsibility here. Okay.
It's all on the cloud.
It's all in the cloud. Now, what does that mean? That means all I'm doing is I'm using the service. Okay. So if I actually have something like that, right, I'm just using that service. Now, you may actually be doing this and you didn't even realize you're using software as a service. So think about something like Dropbox, right? If you're actually a user of Dropbox, all of your stuff you're backing up to the cloud, you may actually be using something like that, Carbonite or whatever else it might be that's actually out there for you. You're actually using that as a service. You're not building anything in their infrastructure. We're not doing anything. The only thing we're doing is saying, here's where I need to store information, and it stores it for us. That's one that most of us on the end side of, on the end user side of things might be familiar with. But Office 365 is another example of software as a service that's out there too, okay? I'm not building the infrastructure for Office 365. I'm not building an Exchange server. I'm not building a SharePoint server. I couldn't remember what the name of that thing was. I'm not building any of that other stuff that's out there. I'm just saying, I need to use that. Okay, so that is another example. And of course, probably the big example in the workforce today is something like Salesforce. Once again, we're not actually having to build that software anywhere else. We're not having to manage it. We're not having to do anything for the infrastructure. It's out there. We're just connecting to it, and we are consuming that type of service. So as far as service models go, remember, the key here is to actually understand what it is that the customer needs to accomplish, right? Is it something that I'm actually trying to host? Okay, that's infrastructure service. Is something that I'm actually trying to make sure that I can build. Then that's platform as a service, and then of course software as a service as well. All right. So now that we have that understanding, what other architecture do we need to understand here? Okay. Well, we need to go into that other realm. I said that there were 5 characteristics, and I kind of jumped around. I said there's 3 service models. Mm-hmm. Do you know what the other one is? The 4 that I mentioned, by chance?
I do not.
It's called a deployment model.
Okay.
Okay. So now that's a harder one because most of us don't probably actually understand that. But when we start talking about deployment models, this is how we normally talk about it. Okay. There's private cloud, there's public cloud, there's hybrid, and then there's community. Now, what in the world is private cloud about? So private cloud can actually mean a couple of different things. I can actually build my own infrastructure right here at IT Pro TV, and if I'm building my own server farm and everything, notice that in that entire cloud, I'm the only one that actually has equipment in that. So I own essentially the infrastructure of that cloud. Now, can we also build a private cloud even inside a public cloud? Yes, in theory, okay? But if you're doing that, you're actually doing the idea here where you're essentially doing what we call like a bare metal hypervisor. In other words, you're actually renting that entire server from whoever the cloud provider is, and you're actually saying, the only virtual machines that I want on here are mine, okay? So that's the idea of a private cloud. It's not exactly the most challenging thing in the world, but you get the idea. Now, by far the most popular one here is what we call the public cloud. Now, in that public cloud environment, notice that I actually have multiple companies, and we're actually taking a look, and it doesn't matter which of these servers that's actually on it. Inside that virtualization, inside that cloud environment, okay, they're all pretty much using the same physical infrastructure. So that means even on the same machine, your own competitor could actually have a virtual machine right next to yours, okay? And they have a way of segmenting that so it doesn't actually, bother each other. But at the same time, that's what the public cloud does for us. It gives us the ability to actually expand globally, okay? It also reduces the cost because everybody pays into it as well. So you get to actually not have to worry about it. Private cloud, very expensive because you're paying for everything. But here's the idea of the public cloud. The other one that we have is hybrid cloud. Now, hybrid cloud for us is a little bit different in this way. You have, I should have put hybrid cloud. I actually didn't do that. So a hybrid cloud is when you have infrastructure both in some type of cloud environment, and then you have other infrastructure. So it could be where you have physical infrastructure right here on premises. It could be where you have it in the public cloud. It could be where you also have it in a private cloud. It could be where you have part of your infrastructure in what we call the community cloud as well.
Now,
it doesn't matter. There's actually different ones.
Okay.
Yeah. So all those combinations work. You might have a private cloud connecting to a public cloud. So you have some in one environment, you have some in the other. You have a hybrid type of connection there. And so you also have a secure link in between those two. So hybrid cloud environments are really good for a couple of purposes. One usually is compliance more than anything else, okay? So you might see that. And then lastly, this is more industry driven than anything else, what we call the idea of a community cloud, okay? In a community cloud, you might still have a shared infrastructure in the cloud itself. But different companies that are out here really do connect and use that entire infrastructure. So the example they use is healthcare and insurance. There's tons of insurance companies, but they all essentially use kind of like the same type of database. Same thing with hospitals and healthcare providers. They'll have access to some type of industry-wide infrastructure that they need access to get access to the data as well. So something like that could actually be helpful. So I always think about it in terms of car parts more than anything else. There's that database, right, that everybody essentially hooks into to find where they can get stuff. If you ever ordered a part online and you had to talk to the people like, I don't have it here, but I can get it from this person who can get it from that person. Amazon's actually a good provider of that as well.
That's a good example, yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of times you look on their site, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to order this, but it's actually through somebody that's, some other company that's actually right there where you're actually ordering it from.
Right.
So that's an example as well. But just kind of realize that there are these ideas of the deployment models that are out there too. So what we want to do is make sure that you at least have this understanding on the cloud environment side. You're really not touching much. You do have access to it, but it's probably going to be through a web portal type of configuration if you're doing anything. Also, of course, taking a look at the idea of the service models that are out there as well, okay? Those are actually going to be key for you in understanding. Remember the key question there? What is it that I need to accomplish? Or what is it that the customer needs to accomplish? Is it going to be hosting? Is it going to be building? Or is it going to be consuming something? That is how you can actually tell what the actual customer is going to need to do. And then the idea of the deployment model, this is not so much a customer-facing side as much as it is what you actually build in terms of an architecture of what you actually need to accomplish as far as the infrastructure goes too. So these deployment models are actually out there for us as well. So this usually is built upon some type of requirement that we have, whether it's about the idea of a level of security or some type of management that we have. That's what deployment models are generally about. So Aubrey, with that in mind, that should be a good review of some of the basic concepts that we definitely need to make sure that we have a conversational knowledge of as we continue to move forward in our CCNA studies.
All right. Well, thank you, Ronnie. Now we have a better understanding of network topology architecture of the cloud. And thank you all out there for watching. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Aubrey Spurgeon.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.